Welcome back to part 3 of my First Time Home Buyers series. Today I'm going to discuss what we have to accomplish between contract and closing. Congratulations! With this fully signed contract, you're 2/3 of the way to the finish line. So what happens next? Once I have a copy of the fully signed contract, your deposit needs to be delivered to the listing broker's office or, if we are trying to close quickly, the seller's attorney's office within 48 hours. I will forward the fully signed contract along with the appropriate documentation to your banker so you can start your mortgage application process, as well as your attorney, who will add your contingency dates to their calendar. If you haven't already hired an attorney, now would be the time to do so. Next, you need to schedule inspections. Sometimes in order to make the deal work, the house is sold in as-is condition, but the buyer is still encouraged to inspect. Inspections can be for informational purposes only, with or without an inspection contingency, but owner-occupants should always retain their right to terminate a contract if inspections reveal more serious defects than the buyer or seller is willing to repair. If the house has public connected water and sewer and no chimney, you'll only need to hire a home inspector. If the home has a chimney, I highly recommend you either hire a home inspector that is also a certified chimney inspector, and I have one of those on my Rolodex, or bring in a licensed chimney inspector with good reviews. The same would hold true if you are buying a home with a pool. If the house has well and septic, you'll need to inspect water quality, water pressure, the well's recovery time, and the functionality of the septic. The buyer pays for all their inspections, but the seller pays to pump the septic during the septic inspections. Once we receive the inspection results, you will either sign off on inspections if there are no problems you want addressed, or I send a notice of failed inspection items to the listing agent along with a copy of the corresponding inspection pages, which starts a whole new round of negotiations. As a manager once told me, as is means nothing. Sometimes if the defects will have to be disclosed, like a high radon reading or failed septic, the sellers may be more inclined to make the necessary repairs rather than lose the contract and have to start over. Then again, there are times when seller and buyer can't come to terms, regardless of whether the listing is being sold as is and the contract falls apart. As I stated in part 2, you want an experienced agent who can think outside the box because sometimes the seller doesn't have the ability to make repairs, so we have to get creative to hold the contract together. Once we have successfully negotiated our repair requests, a satisfaction addendum is written, sent around for all parties to sign, with the fully signed copy forwarded to your banker and your attorney. All work, unless agreed upon by all parties, must be completed prior to closing, with any receipts turned over to the buyer for their records. Once you notify your banker that inspections are completed and you're ready to move forward, the banker will take your credit card number to order appraisal. While I am with you at inspections, it's the listing agent who meets the appraiser at the house because their job is to help the appraiser justify the contract price. I'm going to stop at this point to remind you that except for day-to-day living expenses and the costs associated with your mortgage, you aren't spending any money if it's not absolutely necessary. You are still a ghost until after you close. About a week after the appraisal is conducted, the report is reviewed by the underwriters with a copy of the appraisal forwarded to you when it's released from underwriting. If the house appraises, we move on. If the house doesn't appraise, then we have to negotiate with the seller. Sometimes it's the contract price that must be renegotiated because banks won't write mortgages if the contract price is higher than the appraised value. Sometimes it's the actual house itself that requires work prior to the underwriter signing off on the appraisal. Most of the time, the required work is completed by the seller, but there are times when the seller can't or won't make any repairs, so it's up to the buyer to make repairs to a property the buyer doesn't yet own in order to move forward. In these cases, your attorney will write a hold harmless agreement for buyer and seller to sign, releasing the current owner from any liability should anything happen while the buyer is working at the house prior to closing. Once these repairs are completed, the appraiser comes back to the property for re-inspection, which you will also pay for. Once re-inspection is completed and the underwriter signs off on the appraisal, the next contingency hurdle we need to clear is title search, which is done by your attorney's office and is considered a closing cost that can be reimbursed if you are getting closing cost concessions from the seller. With a clean title, meaning no one has any claims to the property, the bank can issue mortgage commitment and we're in the home stretch. You're still not spending money, and you're definitely not quitting your current job, because I've had that happen. But you're almost to the closing table. In the last mile of the race, the bank will run your credit one more time, verify your employment, make sure you have enough traceable funds to close, and then issue clear to close. With clear to close, the attorney's office will coordinate a time and date for closing, while you and the seller call the power company to arrange transfer of service on the day you take possession of the property. The very last thing we do prior to closing is the final walkthrough to make sure the house is in broom-clean condition with no damage beyond reasonable wear and tear. Every once in a while, there is a problem at final walkthrough that delays the closing or at least changes the terms of the contract. But more often than not, final walkthrough is a formality, and once I pry you out of the house, because I can tell you you're not going to want to leave, you can head over to your attorney's office for your closing. I used to attend all my closings, but with COVID, that privilege is a thing of the past, and closings are only for buyers and their attorneys. And that's how you buy your first home. Obviously, this is a lot to digest, so I encourage you to reach out to me with any and all of your questions. I joke that I push the boundaries, that there are no stupid questions, but there really aren't when you're purchasing a home, and it's my job to provide you with the correct answers. I thank you for tuning in. More great info to follow in future videos. Ciao.